So good afternoon and welcome to this e-Memoir session. It's actually the first of this new year, isn't it, actually, Beesh, as well, interestingly. And we'll be covering traineeships and essential characteristics for successful delivery for 16 to 18-year-old learners. Session's going to be run by Beesh Kachmarchik at e-Memoir. And as ever, we like to keep these sessions interactive as possible, so feel free to use the question or chat facility at any point throughout the duration of this webinar. If you're watching this webinar on a recording, thank you very much. If you have any questions, then please feel free to get in touch with us using the email addresses that you will find at the end. It'd be useful for you to share these webinars and any of the associated materials with your colleagues. And if you too are watching this and you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my microphone and I'm going to hand over to Beesh. Thank you very much, Beesh. Enjoy the session all.
Thanks very much, Marek. And as Marek says, he'll take the video off in a few moments, just to reassure people that know me, particularly Adrienne and others that know me, that yes, it's certainly age is catching up, and you know, with the period of lockdown as well, the growth of a beard just helps with that process. Thanks very much for tuning in this afternoon for the first of this new academic year's webinars. We've got another one tomorrow on adult education and the changes there, and several more to follow on things like coaching, mentoring, particularly for apprenticeships and traineeships, as well as our usual updates on funding. I'm focusing on traineeships and 16 to 18-year-old learners on traineeships, so I won't be referring a lot to adult traineeships, although many of the principles that underpin successful frameworks for delivery of traineeships apply as much to the 19 to 24 age group as they do to 16 to 18-year-olds. The reason I'm doing this is partly because of the market entry exercise, which obviously one or two of you are already aware of, because you might be hoping to enter the market to deliver 16 to 18-year-olds in terms of the traineeship and pre-apprenticeship offer, but also to those of you who might already be delivering, either as part of a 16 to 19 grant that you're getting if you're a college, local authority, or if you've got a standalone 16 to 18 contract and you're looking for ways to improve your performance on that. That will be hopefully of some use to you today. A little bit of background. We know that traineeships have been given a bit of a boost recently with the plan for jobs, and that's well over £200 million of additional investment, and I'll come back to that. And I think the key thing here is, and some of you will know, I've been a great advocate of traineeships from their inception, and in fact was involved in the pilots of those. Before we called them traineeships, we basically were looking at pre-apprenticeship programs as a real option for those people who are 16 to 24. Of course, it does include 19 to 25-year-olds with educational health care plans who will be funded through the young persons funding formula, and therefore they can be included in this market entry exercise. But essentially those people that were not quite there for work, not quite ready for work, but given a traineeship, finishing touch, a step up type program, a pre-apprenticeship program, would be able to enter the world of work, become an apprentice, or carry on into further learning at least at level 2, and if not higher. So there was already an impetus to increase the number of trainees, and that was even before COVID-19, with a 10% increase in the AB allocation for traineeships that was to facilitate that. I think the key message here is, if you're thinking of entering the market, and this is your first go at traineeships, focusing on 16 to 18-year-olds, the key driver here, which you will see clearly in the criteria that are being applied if you go through the request process, the application process, is that unless you've got effective partnerships with employers, and I would add that's got to be extended to other agencies such as referral agencies, it's very difficult to get a traineeship going, certainly successfully, and one which delivers good outcomes. So that's a key driver, and it's absolutely critical that that's seen as one of the essential building blocks. They did peak at about 24,100. That included young people and adults up to the age of 24, but steadily they've fallen since then. In the last year before the investment, they were about just over 14,000. This first year of this additional investment, they've reached about 17,000. But that's way short of what the government was hoping to see, which was a tripling of the number of traineeships. So there's a problem in this really good option for young people. Why isn't it attracting those young people? Why isn't it leading to the outcomes that those young people are seeking? Although, let me just add, there are some very good outcomes in terms of progression to apprenticeships compared to other groups that might be at the same age group. But we're just not getting that participation. And that's obviously a critical factor. And it's as a result of this that various flexibilities were introduced during the COVID-19 crisis as part of the investment strategy in skills. And you'll see the importance of that in a few moments. I think, though, that although there have been positive outcomes in terms of particularly employment and apprenticeships, there is still some major concerns, and that's at different levels, not just in the media, but certainly between us as providers. And here I'm talking as a representative of an organisation that works as a college, grant funded for its 16 to 18, so we do traineeships, but also as the chair of a private training company, which does about 70 traineeships a year, mostly for 16 to 18 who are hoping to progress into employment and apprenticeships. So there are some issues about the availability, first of all, of those traineeships, which have critically have as the, if you want, core objective is that placement that gives the young person access to the world of work, the take up from young people. So that's a demand side issue. And obviously some of the issues that then relate to the quality of the delivery models as well as the outcomes. So thanks very much for those first couple of questions. By the way, I will address those questions in a moment. Now, the traineeships have recently been the subject of a procurement process for 19 to 24s. That was a bit laboured, I know, and there was delays on it. And this market entry process that we'll talk a wee bit about for 16 to 18. So without looking at the nature of the traineeship and what's the characteristics of a good traineeship, there was some good news in the fact that the government, through the plan for jobs last year and this year's budget, was putting about £237 million into traineeships as part of its investment in skills. And that included payments that would be made not to you, the providers, but to employers as an incentive payment to take on trainees. Now, obviously, this is in competition with things like Kickstart, sector-based work academies, and obviously the other placements that are available through apprenticeships and study programs. But this would have allowed employers that maybe hadn't thought about taking on trainees the opportunity to take on up to 10 learners done in each of the regions of England. That's 9 regions, and that would allow them up to 90 incentive payments for any one employer. Now, by the way, an employer has to offer at least 70 hours of a work placement to be able to earn the incentive payment, and it's only paid on completion of the placement. Employers, by the way, can offer more than one placement. So you might find that some employers, some learners will be with 2 different employers for 2 different periods of 70 hours. Each one of those employers can, if they wish, apply for an incentive payment. By the way, they do not need to apply if they don't want to. And by the way, that process is done by them, but with information that you provide that obviously is critical to the recording of that work placement on the individualized learner record. And those incentive payments were there to support that engagement, as well as other costs such as PPE for trainees, etc. And by the way, we've now got news that will be extended up until the end of July next year. So obviously some of those payments will have been made for learners that you were offering placements to up until the end of this month. Hopefully the employers will get those claims in before the end of October. Sorry, the placements would have been done before the end of September. Hopefully those employers will have put their claims in by the end of October. But given, although there was that significant investment, The progress report, which was published earlier this month, and that was in September, showed there were about 17,000 traineeship starts, which obviously is well short of the government's first year target of about 36 and a bit thousand. And they were hoping to get, certainly this year, a further 43,000. So you can see there is still a two-sided problem. One is the supply of traineeship places. The other side is the demand from young people to take on those places, even when they're available. And we know that we've got a similar issue with Kickstart, where again, the number of placements that have been offered exceeds the number of people that want to take them up. So there is still an issue about getting demand for traineeships established. And one of the things that this market entry exercise is trying to do is not only add some high quality providers into the traineeship market, but those high quality providers will have ideas, innovative approaches to engaging with learners and therefore increasing the demand for traineeships, either through referral, through social media, or through any other devices that you've got, which obviously this market entry exercise will be hoping to take advantage of. There have also been some changes in operational detail. This is what I call the flexibilities, and these have been retained to a large extent even after the lockdown. First of all, for those older apprentices, not the focus of today, but the 19 to 24 age group, there was an increase in the funding rate for the core activity of work preparation and work experience, which now stands at £1,500. There was also an extension of the maximum duration of a traineeship, which was originally a minimum of 6 weeks, a maximum of 6 months. It's now can be a maximum of 12 months. I think, and certainly from my experience, most of our trainees have really sort of been around the 18-week to 24-week, up to half a year. But obviously with some trainees who might be the furthest away from being ready for a job or an apprenticeship, particularly if there's issues with English and maths, or issues with confidence, etc. I think that's quite an important flexibility. But also it means that you've got to make sure the content matches that extension, and that in that will be obviously the criticality of the work placement or work placements. But also it's been extended. This has been a problem that we've recognised with level 3 learners, because originally the maximum pre-qualification level for a traineeship was level 2. Is now extended to level 3, because I think that we are finding that quite a lot of level 3 learners are completing the level 3 programs, and this included 16 to 18-year-olds, but were not able or not ready for work or an apprenticeship, and therefore they needed this form of what I'd call finishing touch or pre-apprenticeship program. Originally, the minimum number of hours for a placement was going to be 100 hours. It's now 70. And most of those apprentices will fit between 70 and 240 hours over the course of the traineeship, and this can be done with more than one employer. Again, 2 or 3 employers might offer some flexibility to individual learners. It might also mean that they can get some experience that might then suit them for maybe a flexible apprenticeship, if that's particularly in the creative sector or in the construction trades. But I think, again, it's the right match between the individual, that's the individual learner, and the individual employers that's the criticality here in terms of success. And that's going to be something, obviously, that you're going to have to be aware of if you're going through the market entry exercise. Now, the other point to note about traineeships is, even if you don't intend to only direct your trainees into apprenticeships, it is increasingly important that there is a direct line of sight to occupational standards so that that can support the transition. So if you're using this as a pre-apprenticeship program or a pre-employment program, there is a line of sight to those occupational standards in terms of the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, even if that isn't necessarily taking on a lot of the content of the apprenticeship. And clearly, of course, the 20% of the job requirement is still there with the apprenticeship at the end of the traineeships, as well as the minimum duration. So you've got to make sure that there is no, and particularly with the new occupational traineeships, which I'll talk to you about in a few moments. The other thing I think that's been added, and this is particularly important, obviously it was critical in terms of the 19 to 24 age group to raise their digital skills levels. But clearly, if we've got 16 to 18-year-olds whose digital skills on the starting of a traineeship are below level 1, and you've assessed them, then I think it's important that digital skills are included in those programs for 16 to 18-year-olds, as well as any adults that you might be offering traineeships to in the 19 to 24 age group. So there have been some changes in operational detail, which have, I think, facilitating and making it easier to get that right design for that individual learner and that individual employer. Now, I'll say a few words about it. Before we go on to the market entry exercise, I know I've answered a couple of questions already. Are there any other questions that you might want to pose before I just have a look at the market entry exercise? And then what I'll do is I'll basically use that as the base for then saying what are the characteristics of a good quality 16 to 18 traineeship. So I'm just having a quick look. No further questions there. Thank you for that. Okay, that's okay. Right, well, this exercise, to some extent, it's been, I know it's a bit like all the procurement exercises have been a bit delayed. This is basically saying that where most 16 to 18 traineeships came from was from grant-funded providers, such as FE colleges, and some standalone 16 to 18 contracts for independent training providers. But really, we need to increase engagement with traineeships on the demand side by having innovative approaches to engaging with young people and offering them the traineeship as something that they'll think of and undertake seriously, at the same time as increasing the supply of traineeships from new providers working with their employer partners. Now, these contracts will be a minimum of 100,000 and a maximum of 300,000, and that's spread obviously over 2 financial years, worth about 30 million. So this is coming out of that big pot of new investment that I talked about. You've basically got until a week on Friday to apply, and it's hoping then that the agency, that's the ESFA, is hoping that you'll be able to start delivering those because you'll get notice of successful requests by November, and then hopefully you'll be able to start delivering those traineeships from the beginning of December. So your capacity to deliver traineeships is going to be one of the key factors that's then considered in that request or in that process of application. They will then run until the end of July 2022. And we obviously will be interested to see what happens with any further extensions beyond that period of time. So your request will automatically be split into financial year values, some available from December of this year till March of next year, and the other bit available from April to July. But the maximum when you add those two together will be 300,000. And if you think about it, it would, at about £3,000 on average per trainee, that's about 100 trainees that some of you might be looking at taking on from scratch. Now, because it's a 16 to 18 traineeship, we will be using the 16 to 18 funding formula, so I'll mention that. But you'll also be following ESFA funding principles, where basically they're going to be calculating your earnings monthly and then paying you by the 14th of the following month, but only on the basis of data that's been validated. So your ILR data in terms of correctly coding the 16 to 18 traineeships, coding their work placements, getting the right postal codes for the employers, the right start dates and end dates. That's all critical. It's not the focus of today, but clearly from a management information point of view, it's critical that you maximize your funding by getting all of that data correct, including obviously the eligibility of the young person for that traineeship. So what are the conditions? Well, to take part in the market entry exercise, you must meet all of the following criteria. I just want to emphasize the word all. You must already have an ESFA contract, a funding agreement or grant for the current year. So that might be for, adult education budget. It could be for loans. It could be for apprenticeships. You've got to have a current Ofsted grade 1 or 2 with an existing contract or, of course, funding agreement or grant. If you've already got a contract which was procured to deliver 19 to 24 apprenticeships for this year, that's 21-22, then obviously you will be considered if you haven't got a grade 1 or 2 yet. If you haven't been inspected, but you've got the results of monitoring visits, there's also an opportunity in the request to enter your information there. However, the other conditions are critical. You mustn't be in any formal intervention. You mustn't have a notice to improve. You mustn't be in a breach of contract, certainly in the last 3 years. And you mustn't have a financial health grade of inadequate. Those of you that have already got 16 to 18 traineeships, either within, without a study program contract or as a standalone contract, then obviously you will not be applying. And those of you have got 16 to 18 grant funded, like a college, well, you should be doing traineeships as part of your normal study program offer and offering them appropriately. And obviously you've got, therefore, to look at some of these conditions that I'm going to look at in terms of good quality, particularly if you find that you've got some increase in interest from learners, say in the next few weeks or months, or maybe after the Christmas break. The key thing that the application or request throws up, which I'm going to cover now in these characteristics, is you've got to have a clear model of how you're going to deliver. And to some extent, the delivery model will reflect the needs of the individual learners and the individual employers. But where you're talking about delivery model, the delivery model might be one that says, right, we're going to offer 18 to 24 week long because we're going to focus on those learners. We know we've got a bit of market information. We know about the availability of apprenticeships and jobs, for example, that might fit with recruitment patterns in a certain sector. We do a lot with the commercial horticulture, with logistics, with the care, as well as with bricklaying, as well as with logistics. And how it links to your longer term goal, well, why are you offering traineeships? Our primary purpose in my organizations, the organizations I work with, is traineeships are pre-apprenticeship programs. So they're basically to get young people into jobs, preferably with an apprenticeship. And a small number of our learners don't do that. A small number go on to higher level further education, but that is not the primary goal. And that's why we are very clear about working on, in some cases, occupational traineeships, where there's a clear line of sight to a particular apprenticeship offer or to a particular employer in a particular sector. The three key questions that then follow are ones that I'm going to pick up through the sort of characteristics that make for a high quality delivery to 16 to 18-year-olds. The first of these that you'd expect is, and by the way, you've only got 250 words in the application for each one of these sections, so you've got to really maximize this, is what's your capacity and capability to deliver high quality traineeships, and whether you've got evidence of learner demand. So have you already got learners in mind? For example, from an existing cohort, who might be at level 2, who are really not suitable for an FE program and are looking for alternative, you might find that, or you might be working with a referral agency such as the National Career Service, or you might be working with Job Centre Plus or National Citizenship Service, or you might have other means which you're getting through a local authority, through various sources. But I think what's critical is how you're going to build on that demand. If you get one cohort going, how do you then develop the capacity and the demand for from another cohort, maybe in an associated field or whatever? But underpinning that is, have you got the resources to be able to deliver a traineeship program from December or soon after, in terms of staffing, in terms of contacts, in terms of contacts with employers, etc., as well as obviously the obvious support services that those learners are going to need, such as tutorial, learning support, etc. So it's a clarity of roughly, and this should underpin how many learners you're hoping to recruit into through this market entry exercise. It could be 2 groups of 15, that's 30. It could be right up to the maximum of, say, 100 to 120 learners. And what kind of resources are you putting into it? What kind of ways have you identified that demand? The third area is the critical area. Once you know what the demand is, have you got the availability of placements from employers or other agencies that you might be working with that might be able to find those placements? And that would be broken down by sector. For example, we focus on in one capacity on the beauty and complementary therapies sector, the life skills sector, the well-being sector, or it could be geographical, which is focusing around Yorkshire and Humberside, or you might be offering across several regions. But the key thing is, have you already got the placements online? From the 1st of December or the first or soon after, could you guarantee that if 30 youngsters took up the demand and took up your offer, that you would have 30 high quality placements or even more to allow some of the learners to move from one employer to another, subject to the minimum 70 hours placement with any one employer. What we found very useful is using this as an interim labour market. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the fourth aspect is, how do you ensure, in terms of the quality of the delivery, the quality of outcomes, so that those young people, you can make sure that the choice and quality of provision is appropriate to each individual. So it's got to be an individualized with an individual learning plan. Duration should suit that. Start point should be different for different learners. How are you going to then make sure that you maximize their opportunities? For example, in terms of finding the interviews, making sure the placements are high quality. If it isn't working in one, can we move it to another? All of these have got to be built in to your plan of action that underpins this market exercise. But this market entry exercise, these questions are actually ones that you should be answering even if you're already delivering and already got contracts or already got a grant to deliver study programs to young people, and you're thinking of extending that to include a traineeship offer. These are exactly the same sort of questions that you should be able to answer. So maximizing your opportunities through this process, I think we've got some key things to sort of pick up. You know what they are. You know it's a national program. By the way, those of you who might be interested in doing this with adults, these are not delivered through any devolved arrangements with the devolved combined authorities. These are still controlled centrally by the ESFA in England. And they've got to obviously focus on young people, 16 to 24, to include, by the way, 19 to 25 with educational care plans, although there are other forms of pre-apprenticeship programs, such as supported internships, that might be more appropriate for those learners, particularly with a range of individual needs. But the programs basically have to have these, what we call mandatory elements, which must feature in any design. Work preparation training, substantial work placement elements. So work preparation training can include CV writing, job search, employability skills, interview skills, maybe a bit of simulation, maybe in one of your in-house places, a substantial work placement with an external employer. And if any of you, by the way, are local authority training providers, you can count other departments of a local authority, such as housing or roads or something like that, as an external work placement. And of course, that work placement element, which should be a substantial part of the program. And English, maths, ESOL, or digital skills as necessary, depending on the start point for the learners. I'll come back to English and maths and the condition of funding for 16 to 18-year-olds, because some providers forget that. And any, if you want, substantial, those are the mandatory elements, but also you can then have what we call a flexible vocational element, which depends on the direction of travel that the young person's got. So you could include, a short bricklaying course, understanding health and well-being, manual handling. It could be a customer service, depending on what particular pathway the learner's taking. But I think the key thing here is that you must have a clear set of expectations for the young person in terms of what destination are they seeking. So there's your goal. It's apprenticeships, employment. That's what drives us. And then we design and deliver the program to ensure that the young person, through those mandatory elements, plus the flexible vocational study that they can do, depending on the length of time, depending on what route they're taking, is the key thing. And I think that those characteristics are then around pretty much, these are the characteristics which I think are common to 16 to 18, as well as to adult traineeships. It's a holistic approach. It's about the learner being seen in the whole, developing all those different aspects, which mean that just because they've got quite a lot of the characteristics, they might not be ready for employment or an apprenticeship. By the way, if they are ready for an apprenticeship, then they should be starting an apprenticeship, right? A traineeship should not be used for those learners who are already in full-time employment or already job ready and can move straight into an apprenticeship, or those who are totally disengaged with learning. So there's a set of characteristics there. The individual, and they've got to integrate all of these key elements. So quality information, advice and guidance, career education, learning support, all the things that you do, and these will be characteristics which are often then checked in terms of audit as well as inspection. Those, by the way, young people are going to be fully funded, so it's not an issue. Adults, by the way, are only fully funded for the core elements of the programme. It depends on individual circumstances. They would be funded for the flexible vocational element. But the key characteristic that underpins all of them is, have you already engaged the prospective employer? So I'll give an example. We expect to take on at least one cohort into commercial horticulture soon. The employers will expect to see them in placements from the beginning of December, over January, February. It's quieter then, ready for Easter, when all of the garden centres will be fully operational in terms of the spring and summer offer. So you can see that we've already got the vacancies set up. We've got the placement set up. Hopefully, a large number of the trainees will then take advantage of the placement and then move on to employment and an apprenticeship. Some might decide, though, at the end of that, that they might want to work with a different employer or go on to a different apprenticeship from what first identified. But because the employers have got to provide the work placement, they've got to offer an exit interview, which will be very critical for those learners who don't necessarily want to take up a post with the employer. But of course, for an employer, this might also be the formal interview where a vacancy exists. For example, the ones that we do them with Hermes and other companies like that. So there is a real job at the end of this. This has been part of the preparation for that job. What we found is that the providers with the highest rates of progression have been always able to flex the programs to meet the needs of individual trainees and employers around some kind of structure. You've got to have that structure which says this is an 18-week or a 24-week experience, but there's always that flexibility around that. Particularly, we've had learners that have been so impressive to the employer that the traineeship has been completed earlier and they move straight into the apprenticeship. We still get all the outcomes, we still got all the quality, the success data out of that. It's just that we had to have those drop, what we call step-off points. Of course, that's also going to be very much tied up with the changing needs of the economy. And in particular, you've got to be able to focus on the local market for jobs. For a lot of our learners, that's going to be the next step for them. So that's why there's a big emphasis within the exercise, as well as within any work that you're doing on traineeships, in relevance in terms of the local job market. There's going to be that sense of a special offer. This is a special program for you, the learner, and for you, the employer. And the ESFA actually emphasizes that in its expectations of providers, so that you've got to have a strong knowledge of the local labour market. Don't go into any traineeship offer, whether as an existing provider or as a new entrant to the market, unless you understand what is the requirement of the local labour market for specific skills, for specific types of people. And then that means also working with other agencies such as Job Centre Plus, Careers Advisors, National Citizenship Service. You might be working with Prince's Trust that then pulls that together. But then it's important to assess that individual to make sure that that programme meets their needs against the core elements. So the core elements are going to be there for all of the learners, but it should reflect individual needs such as timing, duration, the types of placements, and the flexible learning that they want to do. Some learners, if they say, I want to do a certificate or a diploma at level 2, then that might mean that the duration of the traineeship has got to be longer than 6 months. It may have to be 9 months up to a maximum of 12 months. I think it's important that wherever possible, you can provide the vocational and technical learning that's sector focused and prepares them for occupational standards, so that when those, because you've already identified the local labour market has got a shortage of adult care workers, or a shortage of bricklayers, or a shortage of people working in the rail industry or renewables. That's what we're going to provide for that 16 to 18 learner in terms of that direction of travel. But obviously, they've also got to have the options to be able to change, because that's what happens when they have the experience of a work placement. They might say, well, I've gone into adult care. I'm not really convinced it's for me. I might be looking now at something that's more to do with IT or whatever. Now, by the way, I've also included in the materials, for those of you who might be interested, this is from work that's been done several years ago. It's how to actually implement a local strategy with your partners, such as the LEP, such as the Chamber of Commerce, such as the National Career Service, but at a localized level. And it's got all what I'd call all the elements that might underpin it. So I'll let you take that away, because I think it's got a real sense of how you might be able to incorporate that in any submissions you're making. For me, the core of all of this, whether you're going in as a market entry or already got the capacity, but thinking, yeah, maybe we could extend that traineeships, or we maybe got study programs and never done traineeships, the matching process is critical. That's the matching the needs of the employer, particularly at the local level, what's happening in the local labour market, the needs of the individual learner, because you've analysed their needs, you've diagnosed their needs, you've identified the start points. Putting a programme together is the key job for the provider, because you're acting as that key, if you want, go-between and liaison to deliver what the employer is seeking, what the learner is seeking, and devising that program with those two sets of needs in mind. And that's got to be part of your key design features. Now, we know who's currently eligible, so it's now been extended to include level 3s. It does include, and this, by the way, in this market exercise, if you want to target 19 to 25s with an education healthcare plan, they would be included in this, because it's a 16 to 18 target group, including that funding formula. But the key thing here is with the potential to be ready for an apprenticeship or employment within 6 months. If they're all ready to go into the apprenticeship, they shouldn't be doing this program. If they're already in full-time work, again, that isn't really suitable. So those are some key things. But the key thing here is establishing very early motivation. So when you're promoting traineeship, this is one way of identifying demand and growing that demand. Then use things like find a traineeship service. If you've already matched to an individual needs, then you might find that you've got an employer that's already come to you and saying, I'm looking for new entrants into commercial horticulture or into adult care. And these are some of the things that we've seen that work well when you're attracting young people, designed to place you in a better position. If you want to get a better quality job or a better quality apprenticeship, a traineeship might be a good way. This could unlock your potential, particularly your employability, IT. These are little hooks to try and establish a much more positive view of the value of a traineeship, which you might already be getting. We've had 16 to 18-year-olds on study program who, after a few weeks of the study program, said, this isn't for me. I'm really keen on getting into employment. I want to go into an apprenticeship. And this is what the sort of things that I am willing to offer, as well as obviously the types of things I'm looking for in terms of my needs. So, and there's a nice one there from hospitality, which of course is a real hot, with the shortage of skilled labour in hospitality at the moment. An intensive course that tells them so much to prepare you for an apprenticeship in the hospitality sector, and we can guarantee that you'll have an interview with an employer at the end of it. Any sort of hints and tips there that you've applied that you found work to attract young people into traineeships? Any ideas that you've come up with? I'm just looking. Yeah, I think it's don't call it a traineeship. Sometimes you might call it something like talent finders, finishing touches. You know, you're almost ready for the job. This little program will certainly make the difference. It'll make you so attractive to a potential employer compared to some of the other applicants. So there's that sense of something special about it. It's the special offer. Thank you. Yeah, I think those key features, by the way, you know, because I've talked about work preparation, I've talked about work experience with at least one employer, English and maths, digital skills, flexible element can include technical and professional qualifications. I think what's underpinning this is, of course, also is the mentoring and support, the tutorial support, the learning support that we expect to see all the way through the program. All 16 to 18 trainees, the learning support is exactly the same way that you would expect to see it through your allocation that you've got. So it's included in things like the disadvantage uplift, which would be based on prior attainment or based on postal codes. So just answer that question. Different for adults. Yeah, the £150 per month would be if you were seeking this through the adult education budget. For example, if you'd been through successful for the 19 to 24 procurement process. What I think is that from the learner's point of view, and this is also part of your design, you know, it's got to be fully integrated. It's to make sure that the employer is a key partner. Any weakness in this, so we always involve the employers in the commercial horticulture or in the adult care and saying, what elements do you see there, particularly when it comes to the nature of the flexible element, when they might specifically ask for things like the manual handling or control of infections, as something that you would offer as part of the flexible vocational element. So it is a form of interim labour market, and I think that's critical. The most successful providers of traineeships, and I've worked with a fair number of them, they bring together the supply and demand for labour to meet the needs of the local labour market. So there's the supply, the young people, the demand is from the employers. They can be subject specific or sector specific, health and social care, across a range of trusts and local authorities, or they can be employer specific, for example, Amazon opening its new warehouse opening. One of the largest programs we were involved with IKEA was a store opening, about 400 trainees there, or a mix of the two. For example, Essex Cricket Club, which was an employer, but also offering hospitality training within the context of a cricket club. You've got to have effective ways of identifying learner demand. So some of those things we talked about, and building on existing demand. So referrals from Job Centre Plus, from careers, from citizens, and from Prince's Trust, as well as the processes that you might have, such as tutorial and other activities, such as promotional activities, such as industry weeks, etc. We do a lot of selection before we present the young people to the employer. BKSB for things like English and maths. Profiling, we use DISC. Screening, which was used by CUBE, for example. Or observation of tasks. So we give the opportunity for them to work in a team, preparing a meal, and then see which of those learners work best together, and then present those learners to the employer as a cohort, or employers, if it's a group of trusts, for example, in adult care or private care homes. But I think it also requires that good labour market information that's giving you all the stuff you need from the LEP, Job Centre Plus, from the combined or local authority, as well as other sources. We also engage new employers through different strategies, such as employer boards, workplace tutor visits. Our workplace tutors, when they're out visiting apprentices, will identify traineeship opportunities, as they might also with Kickstart, etc., careers fairs or whatever. Or you might be using this as a new route, such as Bury College did with Doosan Babcock, into the nuclear industry. Barclays obviously did this as part of their socially inclusive recruitment, where most of the trainees came from disadvantaged backgrounds or with individual needs, but were progressing into apprenticeships. So seeing it as that type of interim labour market goes back to your key goal. The key goal is employment and apprenticeships. The other thing there, I think, I don't know if you've come across them, but a new thing for this year, although I think they've been around, but not given this title, is occupational traineeships. Again, that could feature in your offer at 16 to 18. They're very specific into a target apprenticeship or occupation. A lot of the content is then aligned up with the knowledge, skills, and behaviors in the occupational standard. And that really does reflect what an employer is looking for in terms of live apprenticeship or job opportunities. It's got all the same requirements we've talked about, but it shouldn't be used to delay the start of an apprenticeship. Just remember that if the learner's already, it shouldn't reduce the duration of the apprenticeship or cover too much of the content so you can't get the 20% off the job. There's some good examples. They're in the framework, the revised framework for traineeships, which I recommend you all read. Rail engineering, adult care, bricklaying are good examples. Are any of you thinking of making your 16 to 18 an occupational traineeship? So you've got already a direct line of sight into a specific apprenticeship, which could be the level 2 adult care. Any of you? Any more questions on that? Oh yeah, we got a question. No, not yet. No, but thinking of it. The key thing here is make sure that that's because the person isn't quite there for the apprenticeship or the job, so need this sort of finishing touch. And that could be because maybe lacking confidence, not enough experience, or they might just simply not have got the English and maths yet. Even if they don't complete it on the traineeship, they will complete the English and maths while they're on the apprenticeship. A lot of it, I think, is because they maybe haven't got some of what I'd call the essential vocational skills, the stuff that would then link directly to the particular apprenticeship. So different ways in which you can recruit and engage trainees. Any of these methods would be good. Interest trust, voluntary sector, job centre. We talked about all of those because you can use them all to actually raise awareness of traineeships and start to identify potential demand and build on any demand. But I think the length of the program, 6 weeks, maximum 12, although most of our learners, by the way, are coming in at 6 months maximum. Yeah, and a good point, Adrian, if you are focusing on young people with disadvantage, with different sets of skills, then again, they might need a lot more support. And therefore, that's the content of the program should reflect that, as well as the length of the program. So that's very much building on personal needs and requirements. And again, don't forget, it can be more than one placement. But if it is, it's still got to be 70 hours with any individual placement and a minimum of 2 weeks with any one employer. Again, I know it's not strictly correct but I like to think that, you know, the placement would be somewhere around 25 to 35 hours a week to really maximize the opportunities. That might not be as it is at the very beginning of the traineeship, but certainly near at the end when we're getting the person ready for their interview, etc. It can be with more than one employer. It doesn't have to. It can be more than two, by the way. It just depends on how much you think you're going to give the benefit to the learner in terms of a variety of different employers. And after all, it does take time to build up a relationship with the employer. So think about that. English and maths, well, in 16 to 18, this is quite specific. If the learner has already got a grade 3 GCSE, then the 16 to 18 condition of funding applies. They will be required to do a GCSE retake. If they've got English and maths at level 2 and below, grade 2, sorry, not level 2. That's the GCSE grading system, the 1 to 9. If they've got it at grade 2 and below, then they can do either stepping stone or a GCSE. The problem about this is that this obviously is dependent on the time as well. Now, the only exceptions to this is any traineeship that lasts less than 150 hours in total, but we don't have any of those. So there's an expectation that they will be allowed to carry on trying to work through either stepping stone quals, such as functional skills, etc. It's different for adults, but obviously the condition of funding still applies. Now, if they're full-time, that's the expectation. If they're part-time, there's a bit more flexibility. A full-time learner is on 540 hours in total. That includes the work placement. Anyone below that is a part-time learner. Part-time learners would still be expected to do, if they could, a GCSE retake, or obviously something like functional skills. So the program can be structured in a range of ways, not just about the duration. You can say how much is going to be done by the provider in the provider's premises, how much is going to be done by the employer in terms of the placements. You might actually deliver some of the knowledge, skills, and behaviours on the employer's premises. It can be one-to-one delivered wholly in the workplace. I've seen that model work well. So that's a really good provider. It could be classroom plus workplace, or it could be any other flexible arrangement. You can offer one or several pathways, depending again on the needs of those individual learners, where they might all be together for the core, but then split to go to their vocational, flexible element, or obviously when they're on placement. You can use work preparation, which can include realistic work environment simulation, but that's only in the work preparation, not in the work placement. And again, we have various stepping off points which match when employers might be looking to fill those vacancies. So particularly if learners are accelerating through a program, then we don't insist on them completing the length of that was originally intended. It's also, by the way, important to find recognition that comes from other sources, such as, for example, from the LEPs. Some of our LEPs actually recognize the outcomes and give them some kind of, if you want, rubber stamp, blue ribbon, or some kind of additional certification. I think the key thing is to make sure that when you include your resources in your submission or in your planning, it's not just the resources when you've got them with you. How do you then ensure that when they're on placement, you've got visits to the placement, you're supporting the employer or delivering some elements of it, such as the English, maths, and digital skills while in employment. So that's got to be factored in as well. Remember, it's always a special offer. This is one of our 6-month, 26-week traineeships. You can see that the employability skills is done at the end, at the beginning and end. The tutorial goes through because there are at least one day, if not two, with us a week. The work placement starts very early on with other learners, such as Adrienne talked about. Until the confidence is greater and better, it might be better to delay the work placement, certainly substantial work placement, until later on in the program. They're also doing English and maths all the way through. They're doing it partly when they're in with us for the away from the work placement, but also they're doing English and maths while on the work placement with the employer helping them along. Karen, if you've already got study program funding and you're grant funded, right? If you're grant funded, your college, for example, or a local authority, if you've got learners who, as part of your study program, you would say, right, it might be better if they did a traineeship rather than a full study program. Remember, a traineeship could be full-time. It could be 540 plus hours over 12 months. But we already, for example, we don't have a contract. We're grant funded as a college. We have traineeship being offered. It's the way that you highlight it in your plan, and then the way that you allocate the appropriate titles to those learners within the ILR. So I'll pick that up with you, Karen, if we can at the end. Yeah, just a few minutes. Here's an example of how it's, we offered these range of pathways. These are college-based. So what's core there, the work preparation, English and maths, but then different routes for those people that want to go into early years, graphic design, etc. But when it comes to the funding, this is the critical bit. So I'll just pick up those questions. Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, they're basically funded in the same way as a young person on a study program. So use the funding bands. The qualifications that they do, particularly flexible qualifications, have got to be approved on the hub. Again, you check that when, or not on the hub, in the Learning Aims Finder, where you can actually find things, find a learning aim. Again, the funding will be attached to retention, and retention's got to be in the core learning aim, which is the work placement. If the learner does not complete the work placement without actually going on to employment, apprenticeship, or further learning, then that's got implications for funding. You lose 50% of the funding, the same rules that apply to other learners on study programs. The learner can draw down disadvantaged funding and learning support, including high needs. That's all the same. They can apply for funding support through the bursary fund if they've got hardship. And if they're 18, although there's some restrictions, they can continue to apply to claim benefits. So in other words, It's exactly the same principles that apply to any other aspects of a study program. So, for example, if you've got any learners who might be looking at taking on for a full-time 540 hours between December and next July, then you would be drawing down £4,188. There's no weighting attached to traineeship, so it doesn't matter whether they're a traineeship in the railway or in care, they're all weighted at A. Most of our trainees are actually in a smaller band, such as band 4 and 3, because they're on shorter programs. But you can see there that depending on the planned hours, and by the way, this planned hours includes the planned hours for the work placement, the work prep, the English, maths, digital skills, and flexible vocational. So here's an example of one of our 18-week traineeships. You can see there's the work preparation is the employability skills, functional English, functional maths, the tutorial, which goes all the way through. The award in practical skills in horticulture is 36 hours. The work placement is a minimum of 150 hours. That's 2 days a week for 10 weeks. And you can see there that would draw down, if that learner successfully completed the program in terms of retention, £2,827. So obviously, if we were bidding, obviously, because we've already got it through the study program funding through our grant, but if you were bidding as a new entrant, then you would be looking at, say, maybe 100 to 110 learners like that would be a maximum of 300,000. So that's how the funding works. Any questions about how the funding works? Okay, thank you. But in terms of completion, for both funding purposes and also for inspection, these are all the important conditions. You can retain the learner if they stay to the end. If they stay to the end, you get 100% of funding and you get positive outcome. If they go into employment, apprenticeship, if they complete the planned hours on the core aim but don't progress, you'll keep the money, but you'll get a negative outcomes in terms of quality. And you can see all the other sort of situations. What that means is, and don't forget the incentive payments will be payments, by the way, which are possibly available if learners complete programs. Do not confuse those, the incentive payments that are paid to the employers to take on the young people. In terms of the outcomes, these are the common outcomes which also apply to adults. Apprenticeship start. Obviously, that apprenticeship's got to last the minimum number of days. That's the 42 days. A job, you can see the conditions there. Progression to an English and maths qualification at a higher level than they achieved on the traineeship. So if on the traineeship, they got the functional skills at level 1, this could be at level 2. Or if they progress to a larger vocational program at level 2 and 3 than what they achieved on the traineeship. So these are the outcomes that you're seeking. And again, don't forget that last question in the market entry exercise was about how you would guarantee that those would happen and how you'd support them. Always think about it as a special offer around that individual needs, or the individual needs of the learner and the individual needs of the employer. So just to sum up, how to ensure high quality outcomes for trainees. We've talked about, okay, this is how you're funding them. This is how you maximize the funding. This is how you maximize the outcomes. We know what the design features are. But in terms of getting it right, that match between the needs and capabilities of the trainee and the requirements of the local labour market and the employers in them are absolutely critical. And that's why we do quite a lot of profiling of our trainees. So, for example, we look at the ability of the trainees to through gaming, to handle the pressures maybe of a very busy garden centre or a very busy IKEA store or a very busy care home, how they can manage some of those stresses. Because sometimes you say to the learner is, this might not be the best route for you. Think of something else. Or let's have a strategy to actually overcome those difficulties. And we can do that through an appropriate learning programme. You could also see it as part of a holistic workforce development strategy, which clearly will be the case with the National Health Service, with adult social care, with green energy investment. You plug into their workforce development strategy, and that immediately means you can identify where the demand for the labour is, and obviously the availability of placements there. How you then got to do is sell it to individuals to take up those vacancies. Close liaison with specialist agencies. Who works with needs? Who works with the unemployed? Who works with those learners with special education needs? And that's why the National Citizen Service, Citizenship Service, Princess Trust. These are all good agencies to work with to increase the demand. I think that initial assessment of trainee needs is absolutely critical. And if you can, quick movement from classroom to workplace might work. I think it depends on the needs of the individual, but we generally found the quicker that those learners are in the work placement, this is what they really want, the better. Integrating everything around the work placement. How do you record the English, maths, and digital skills that's actually used on the work placement? If you have one file or any other device like that, we give our trainees iPads, which have already got their English and maths that's been set for them to achieve while they're on the placement. When they work with the placement supervisor, or in this case, the owner of the garden centre, you can see immediately how the English and maths is being developed, the digital skills, while they use the tools on the work placement. What's really helped us is to have a real appreciation, since our goal is traineeships leading into apprenticeships and employment. They're delivered by the same team that delivers apprenticeships. So there's that constant, if you want, understanding of the needs of the labour market and the needs of employers. So we actually use traineeships as part of a talent pipeline, and that's what our employers actually expect. It also means that we get a big demand from learners because they see what past learners have done and said, oh, they did a traineeship as part of a study program, as part of a separate program, and they've gone on to work at one of the top salons, or they're now a supervisor at a garden centre or whatever. But I think the key thing is to make sure that on the work placement, neither the learner nor the employer is left by themselves. So our staff will visit both, we'll have contact with both to make sure that this is an effective work placement, which of course would apply to any other study program learners. We've removed certain barriers, for example, bus fares, meals, etc. We've done all that. Regular contact, make sure the employer is providing learning and development. We do that, that's standard practice. Again, that's high quality. Structured workbooks such as e-portfolio, which is completed by both learners and employer. And then that regular one-to-one monitoring, as well as good quality exit interviews. Some of our learners are not quite sure about which talent route they want to take. So we offer them some gaming at the very end, which might just finalize that interest they might have, particularly where they might want to be moving into the IT side of commercial horticulture rather than the selling side. So I prefer to work in the back office, and that sometimes reinforces that direction of travel. I think it's going to be seen as a natural progression to employment apprenticeship training and branded as such. And that, I think, is why you have that question about what's your overall goal. So all kinds of appropriate recognition of learning is critical. But also, every time we finish a traineeship program with one cohort or group or with an individual, let's review it, what worked, what didn't work, what we're going to change as a result. And I think where they've succeeded, we see all of those things in practice. All those things have been brought together. All the things we've talked about, the matching processes, getting the design characteristics, branding it effectively, focus on careers, rising stars. See, it's a different connotation, isn't it, for young 16 to 18-year-olds to be called a rising star. Getting that interim labour market, getting it very sector focused. For example, GTL, who do it with construction employers. Now, obviously, bricklaying is very popular. We certainly would like to move into things like the building maintenance, etc., renewables. Getting the employer right in from the beginning and offering a whole range of ways of delivery, as well as integrating all those elements effectively into the program. So those are some of the characteristics, I think, of these programs that have been, which we hope to see. But remember, we've still got these concerns. Poor press, cheap labour, competing with Kickstart, competing with sector-based work academies. There's a lot of issues there. I think it might need to be rebranded. I think poor brand recognition among some users, well, young people, 16 to 18 and their parents, is still a critical issue. But I think we get some very good outcomes. And, it doesn't help when you've got, different sort of routes that are funded in different ways. That's the funding regimes. But I think they've been difficult to market because I don't think they've been adequately promoted as a really good alternative with a high, progression rate, particularly into employment. So those are some, hopefully some key issues that, will get you to think about whether you want to be involved in the market entry exercise. If you do, and this is helpful, then please come back to me if you want, or Marek. Our details are there if you want to come back and ask us a little bit more about it. Are there any other questions, Marek? I know we've just gone over 10 minutes over, but I think it's been worth covering. Yeah. Any other questions?
Not that I can see. Apologies if I have missed anything, but we'll have a look through there, and if we have missed anything, we'll be more than happy to address it and come back to you on reflection. I can't say anything, can you?
Yeah, I mean, in response to Karen, I think, Karen, this was about getting new entrants into the traineeship market. So really, it's highlighting individual independent training providers. If you've already got a study program funding because you're grant funded, you've always been able to offer traineeships as part of your offer to young people. So I don't know if that's clarified it. Okay, thanks for that. That's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions? I've got a couple here. Wait a minute. Okay, thanks there. That's good. Yeah, Adrienne, I think if you can get to these, if you can match the offers effectively with industry placement learners, then I think it's great, because I think the buddying up with any agency, such as the National Citizenship Service or Princess Trust or NACRO, we found that also useful, is that you've already got the learners who've identified what they want, that they're seeking employment, seeking an apprenticeship, they've got the motivation, then that helps us a lot. If we then put them through a little bit of an interview process, or putting them into small groups, sometimes just with the employer saying, like Essex County Cricket Club did, so let's see how they gel, let's see how they work, doing maybe a little hospitality, a little event for guests and players. And from that, the Essex were able to pick a really good cohort of learners that then went through their hospitality traineeship. And of course, most of them are now working with the cricket club. So there are some good, any of these things which identify the demand, but build on that interest as well. Where they've really failed is when you say, right, let's take a random group of 12, advertise a traineeship. We don't really know a lot about them. We don't know what placements we're going to offer. That's, I think, a recipe for disaster. It does help when you've got very good quality placements with a good chance. And at the labour market at the moment, in hospitality, catering, adult care, construction, renewables, logistics is very strong. So there should be some good placement offers. Thank you then, Marek. Is that it? We'll make sure that everyone gets copies of the recording and the slides.